Khabib is the GOAT. We hear this a lot, but is it true? Well, in this video, you're going to find out if that's true or false. I'm going to be analyzing Khabib's entire UFC career, fight by fight, and we're going to determine, logically, analytically, was Khabib the GOAT of MMA? Also, I'm not going to be talking about his fights pre-UFC because they were against a lot of journeymen and low-quality opposition. So for the purpose of this video, those fights are going to be irrelevant for his GOAT status. So let's go on to Khabib's first ever UFC fight. So his UFC debut was against Kamal Shalaris. Alright, I know none of you have heard of this guy before, but he was actually an Olympic wrestler and he competed for Great Britain in the 2004 Olympics. So, this sounds like a solid first opponent, right? Wrong. This guy went 0-3 in the UFC, and Khabib fought him when he was 39 years of age. And that Olympic wrestling experience meant nothing because Khabib pretty easily dominated this guy. So, overall, this win, it's not great, but to be fair, it's only his debut, so, can't really blame him for this, okay? Okay, well, let's move on to his second fight. Now, this fight is pretty notorious if you know anything about Khabib's career. So, Gleison Tibau was definitely a pretty big step up in competition for Khabib. Tibau was coming off of a win over RDA, and he had a record of 26-7 at the time. But there is a lot of controversy around this fight. There's a fairly large amount of people that actually think Tibau defeated Khabib in this fight. So let me tell you why people think that. So I guess we'll start off with the stat that really jumps out in this fight is the fact that Tibau defended all 13 of Khabib's takedown attempts. And Tibau also very slightly outstriked Khabib as well. But to be fair to Khabib, it was a really close fight and Khabib had more aggression and cage control. So the fact that he won this fight isn't super crazy, but it's still very controversial. So this was definitely a decent win at the time for Khabib, and it's pretty crazy that this was his second fight, but it comes with all that controversy. Some people don't rate this win at all because it was so close, but that's up for you to decide. Alright, so Khabib's third fight. So I guess Khabib was upset that people thought he lost his last fight because in Khabib's third UFC fight against Thiago Tavares, he brutally finished him. It's seriously one of the nastiest finishes in UFC history. But the thing is about Thiago Tavares, he's definitely not a top-level UFC fighter. So it was a great finish by Khabib, but it wasn't against a very high-level opponent. So let's move on to Khabib's fourth fight. So there's not too much to say about this fight. Abel Trujillo was a 4-time NAIA All-American college wrestler. Shout out to Caleb Rule. But Abel Trujillo had a pretty mid-UFC career, and Khabib absolutely dominated this guy. He finished 21 takedowns against Trujillo, and then he won the unanimous decision. So, this win isn't particularly impressive, especially considering the fact Tony Ferguson was able to finish this guy. So, it was another win in the books for Khabib, but nothing really significant. So, Khabib's fifth UFC fight was against the journeyman, Pat Healy. Now, this isn't to disrespect Pat Healy, but he went 0-5 in the UFC. And, in the first two rounds he did okay, but in the third round he got smashed by Khabib. And then Khabib wins another easy unanimous decision. But this is another win that isn't really impressive at all. Alright, so Khabib's sixth fight. Alright, here we go. This is what we've been looking for. Khabib finally gets himself a top 5 opponent, and it's RDA. RDA is super legit, but Khabib actually dominated RDA and didn't lose a single round. And this was RDA when he was 29 in his prime. RDA was on a 5-fight win streak. He had a win over Prime Cowboy. And then, after he lost to Khabib, he went on another 5-fight win streak where he smashed Benson Henderson, Nate Diaz, Anthony Pettis, and Cowboy again. Without that loss to Khabib, RDA would have been on a 10-fight win streak. And in less than a year after the Khabib loss, RDA became the lightweight champion by completely mauling Anthony Pettis. So this is definitely one of Khabib's best wins ever. So you might be wondering, why didn't Khabib get a title shot after this fight? Well, sadly, he got injured after this fight. He had reoccurring knee injuries, and he had a rib injury in 2014 and 2015. You know, that rib injury actually forced Khabib to pull out against Tony Ferguson, and that was the first time they were scheduled to fight, and he didn't come back until 2016. Alright, now it's 2016. It's time for Khabib's 7th UFC fight. Alright, so who's he coming back against? He's gonna be fighting the legendary powerhouse Daryl Horcher. Yeah, definitely a big step down in competition. But to be fair to Khabib, he is coming off of a 2-year layoff, so you can't be too upset for him getting a gimme fight. But there's not really too much you can say about this fight. I mean, it was a super dominant performance from Khabib. I mean, it's probably one of Khabib's most dominant performances in UFC history, actually. But again, Daryl Horcher was definitely not a high-level opponent. So, you know, that's not the highlight reel you show to your girlfriend to impress her. That's just not that impressive. Alright, so let's move on to Khabib's 8th UFC fight. So, actually, before I go into this, let me just mention, it was supposed to be against Tony Ferguson again. This was the second time they were scheduled to fight each other, but Tony had to pull out due to injury. But it's okay, I'm sure we'll get this fight eventually, right? Anyway, let me continue. So Khabib ends up fighting the notorious Michael Johnson at UFC 205. And he dominates Michael Johnson and submits him with a Kimura. But this was a huge fight for Khabib because he had an awesome call out against Conor McGregor in his post-fight interview. And during his fight with Michael Johnson, we got one of the coldest moments in UFC history when Khabib was telling Michael Johnson to give up. But if we analyze the quality of this win, it's just not great. Michael Johnson is one of the most inconsistent fighters in UFC history. I mean, he's got some solid wins over Dustin Poirier and Tony Ferguson, but overall, he was just another journeyman. Okay, so Khabib's 9th UFC fight was originally scheduled to fight Tony Ferguson again for the 3rd time, but Khabib was hospitalized due to too much tiramisu, which complicated his weight cut. Man, is this fight ever going to happen? Is it like cursed? Alright, so instead, Khabib fights Edson Barboza. So, Edson Barboza is a solid opponent, but his skill set matches up terribly against Khabib. And that showed in this fight because Khabib took him down and kept him down basically the whole fight. So, you know, solid win for Khabib, but to be fair, this was a great matchup for him, so, you know, you can rate it however you want, but it was a favorable matchup. Alright, so let's move on to Khabib's 10th UFC fight. So, Conor McGregor at the time has finally been stripped of the UFC lightweight belt, and now we have Tony versus Khabib at UFC 223. But wait, oh no, Tony Ferguson trips while doing his media obligations? Okay, no, that's fine. Maybe just a bump, a bruise. No, he completely tears his LCL. Ooh, and you're done. This fight's just never gonna happen, is it? So, who's Khabib gonna fight? Oh, I know. Have him fight Max Holloway. Alright, decent choice, but the New York State Athletic Commission forces Max Holloway to pull out of the fight due to his weight cut being deemed unsafe, blah blah blah. Okay, well, we're so cooked, right? Who is Khabib gonna fight? Well, they decide to feed him Ala Quinta. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, but at the time, there were people saying that Ala Quinta exposed flaws in Khabib's style. What an absolute joke. No, not at all. Khabib literally played with him and beat him 50-43 on 2 of the judges' scorecards. So yeah, I mean, Khabib wins the belt against a mid-lightweight. You know, I guess he's champion now, but I mean, he beat Ala Quinta, guys. Like, that's not a great opponent. But let's go on to Khabib's 11th UFC fight. Here we go. This is the big one. Conor versus Khabib. Literally the biggest fight in UFC history. And what more can really be said about this fight? The hype for this fight was absolutely unbelievable, and probably half of the UFC fans that exist today came from this fight. So Khabib had a ton of pressure going into this fight. This was by far the biggest fight of his life. And Conor McGregor, you know, he was talking a lot of trash. He was getting really deep and personal. And if Conor McGregor ended up beating Khabib, there's no chance Khabib would be able to recover from that. So when the fight finally came, we got one of the best fights in UFC history. And Khabib was dominant in the first 2 rounds, but then he slowed down and he took the 3rd round off, and Conor beat him in that round. He gave false hope to Conor fans all around the world. But then Khabib proceeds to finish Conor McGregor in the 4th round by submission. And boom, there you go. Khabib is a certified UFC superstar. But Khabib has been suspended for 9 months because of the little brawl he got into after he finished Conor McGregor. But yeah, this fight was huge for Khabib, and this was definitely a solid win. You can't take away anything from Khabib in this fight. He beat a legit game-motivated Conor McGregor. Big respect. Great win. Much better than Al Iaquinta. Alright, so Khabib's 12th UFC fight. He is so back, and he's ready to defend the title. And he's going to defend the title against Dustin P-Head Poirier at UFC 242. Now, there were some people that thought this fight was going to be more competitive than the McGregor fight, since Dustin Poirier is a more well-rounded fighter than Conor, and this was definitely prime Dustin Poirier as well. He was on one of the best win streaks of his career, but it wasn't enough. Dustin Poirier was not paid in full. And he had a few good moments against Khabib, but he made a critical mistake of pulling his notorious guillotine that never works. And then he ended up getting submitted in the 3rd round by RNC. So yeah, again, this is a super solid win from Khabib. Dustin Poirier was in his prime, and Khabib completely dismantled him. Alright, let's move on to Khabib's 13th UFC fight. So again, Khabib was originally supposed to fight Tony Ferguson, but due to the incident, the fight was canceled. Now, Tony Ferguson still decided to make weight for this fight, even though it was canceled, which in retrospect was probably the worst decision of his entire career. Because not too long after doing this weight cut, he fights Justin Gaethje for the UFC interim lightweight belt, 2 back-to-back weight cuts, and then he brutally loses to Justin Gaethje and is never the same again. So now Justin Gaethje is next in line for a title shot against Khabib, and we finally get to see this fight at UFC 254. A lot of people were hyping up Justin Gaethje. They thought he'd be the one to bring something to the table, but he actually ends up doing the worst out of Khabib's last 3 opponents. He gets finished in the 2nd round by a triangle choke. So yeah, that's another super impressive win by Khabib. So yeah, what's he gonna do next, guys? What's next for Khabib? And he retires. That's the end of his career. He's done. And you know, you can't blame him. His reason for retiring was because his dad, his coach, passed away. So personally, I don't hold this against him. But here's the thing, after we break down Khabib's entire UFC career, I think it's pretty clear he's definitely not the GOAT. But don't get me wrong, he's definitely an amazing fighter. Probably the greatest lightweight ever at this moment, but, you know, Makhachev might surpass him soon. But if you look at it objectively, Khabib was handed a bunch of favorable matchups, and he fought a lot of journeymen as well. So you can't in good faith call Khabib the GOAT of MMA when you have people like John Jones, GSP, who had more title defenses and fought way higher quality competition. But hey, this is just my opinion. What's more important is, what do you guys think? What qualifies a fighter as the GOAT of MMA? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to the LSFC YouTube channel. And if you'd be so generous, become an LSFC channel member, become an LSFC core member, and get access to exclusive channel perks, as well as our LSFC grappling resources, which are great for beginners and intermediates. If you're doing wrestling, jiu-jitsu, anything like that, please consider becoming a channel member today.